Welcome to Trials and Triumphs, the podcast where we uncover the extraordinary stories of everyday people who faced challenges, embraced change, and found triumph along the way. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to Namon Bills, an artist, designer, and storyteller whose career path has been anything but predictable. Namon grew up in Spanish Fork, Utah, as the oldest of 8 children, and his love for creativity led him to earn a BFA from BYU and an MFA from Utah State University. He started his career in the newspaper industry, leading a weekly publication to award-winning success. But when the time came to pivot, he found himself diving into the world of UX design, learning coding and user experience on the job. Now, as a UX designer, husband, and father, Namon continues to embrace creativity in all aspects of his life. In this episode, we'll talk about navigating career transitions, the courage it takes to reinvent yourself, and the lessons Namon has learned along the way. Namon, I'm so glad you're here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Julian.
How are you doing this morning?
Doing good. I've been a little under the weather, a little bit of a cough, but hopefully that's not going to be a problem here.
Oh man, well, we're so glad to have you on the show today, and we hope that you feel good through the episode and heal real quick.
Well, thank you.
As we dive in here, tell us a little bit about yourself. I know I just gave you a brief intro, but tell us about you.
Yeah, so like you said, I love creativity. I so appreciate that you focused on that in my bio because I think that's kind of one of the central themes of my life. Love creative problem solving, whether that's in UX or in art. I love teaching and just love people in general. You know, I'm an introvert, but I have found that when I get out of my shell and just get to know people, I find that very rewarding and fulfilling.
That's really awesome. I guess as we look at you, who you are today, tell us a little bit about your early life and background.
So the challenge that I want to talk about is that I was single until I was 36. I got married at 36. I grew up in a family, very devoted members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I can still consider myself a very devoted member of that faith. It has brought a lot of joy and fulfillment to my life, and part of that is that marriage is really important. Marriage and family is really important, and so I grew up in a big family. Like you mentioned, I'm the oldest of 8 children. Loving parents, really positive experiences growing up. Certainly not perfect because, you know, nobody's perfect. So all parents make mistakes and my parents aren't immune from that. But overall, just a very positive experience, but also very much looking forward to marriage and raising a family on my own when the time came. And so getting married at age 36, that's definitely beyond the average, like older than quite a bit, I would say, older than the average
Yeah.
that members of our church get married. And so that was a challenge for me. This was something that I very much wanted and something that I had been raised to believe that this was really important, and I do believe it's important. And so, yeah, that was a struggle for me.
Wow. As we look at your early life and background, what were some of the key moments that shaped you growing up?
Yeah, well, I think being able to see my parents' relationship and knowing that they had what's called a temple marriage, you know, that they were married for eternity, not just for right now, was really key. Like that was really important, and that was very much something that I wanted and had my sights set on. And there are other, I would say, some kind of like milestones along the way. I was involved in scouting, and being an Eagle Scout was important. And we had a great scouting program that I grew up in. And so, you know, I think it was largely thanks to my leaders and my parents that I was an Eagle Scout. I think on my own, I wouldn't have accomplished that. But that was a really important milestone to me. Another one later on, after um, graduating from high school, was serving a mission for my church. And you talk about growing or formative experiences. I think that if you can think of a 2-year full-time missionary experience as one experience, which I think is hard to do, um, but if we call that an experience, it was certainly one of the most formative experiences for me to grow both spiritually, socially, to be able to get out of my comfort zone, like way out of my comfort zone, I would say, and in talking to other people and maybe sharing something with them that they're not super excited to hear. Like a lot of people in Italy where I served are not very religious, and this wasn't a topic they were anxious to discuss. Um, and so we dealt with a lot of rejection, but at the same time, I got to know amazing people. I had great companions that I worked with as my fellow missionaries, and just people that we got to know and teach, and people that we just came to love over this experience. So yeah, serving a mission was a hugely formative experience for me.
That's really, really quite a unique experience, especially for those who are not a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. For me, what I'm curious about is you started off in the arts and in design. What inspired you to move towards that route as opposed to moving into a different space?
Oh yeah. I was good at drawing as a kid. That's pretty much it. Um, I enjoyed it, and people encouraged me in it. And I decided when I was probably about 5 years old that I wanted to be an artist when I grew up, and I stuck with that. It was really, that's what I chose to major in. I didn't have any question that that's what I was going to do. I was just certain about that. Um, Later on, my brother told me that he was surprised that I had chosen to major in art because he said, I felt like you were better at other things. And I said, oh, that's probably fair. Like, that's probably accurate. But, I'm glad you didn't tell me that at the time. Um, but I loved it. It was really, really fulfilling experience for me to study art, to major in art. I got to know great people, and I love just being able to express myself creatively in those ways. It did land me in an opportunity to have a diverse work experience because nobody's waiting to hire you when you graduate with that art degree. But yeah, I don't regret that decision at all. Sometimes, like I've learned in UX, there's a lot of cognitive psychology associated with that, and I find it fascinating. And so I've thought, well, would I have studied that? If I had known. And the thing is, I don't think I would have not studied art. I always was going to study art, and I don't regret that, even though it hasn't turned into a career for me. It's just been a really positive thing in my life.
That's really cool. I guess as we have a better picture of who you are and who you were, and you've given us a brief overview of the adversity or the challenge you want to talk to about today, can you tell us about how this challenge has impacted you initially? Like, what were your immediate reactions, and what were some of the turning points or pivotal moments along this journey?
Yeah, yeah. So I think that I kind of assumed that a lot like what happened with my dad, who got married relatively soon. I think he was married within a year after he finished his mission, and I assumed that I would have a similar path. I had no reason to think otherwise, but I also had no reason to think that, as it turns out. Um, but you don't know. When you're young, you just base your expectations on the experiences of those around you, um, And when that did not materialize and kept not materializing, I would just keep thinking, okay, one more year, maybe next year, maybe next year, maybe, and it just kept going on and on. I was attending singles wards. So these are congregations of young single adults, right? That's everybody who's going to church together so they can meet each other, and eventually got to the point where I was too old to attend, which was 31, and was still single. And my bishop, my congregational leader, wanted me to stay, and so I did for a while. Um, but at one point, I just I realized I was too old. It was I was 34 at that point, and I'd had a conversation with a girl in the ward that we really kind of hit it off, and I was like, oh, this is great, and I didn't know how old she was, which and I'm sure she didn't know how old I was. And then I found out she was 18 and I was 34, and I thought, oh no, like this can't this can't work. Like I need to leave. I need to not be in this ward anymore. And so that was the point at which I left the singles ward and ended up going back to a family ward, a more traditional kind of congregation with families. And um, as a side note, other things happening in my life at that time, um, I had lost my job. The newspaper I was working for went out of business, and the the house where I was living with roommates, my roommate who owned the house came and talked to us one day, and he said, "Hey, how soon could you find another place to live? Because I'm underwater on this mortgage, and I've got to sell my house." And it was like, "Oh no!" And so I ended up moving back home with my parents, and then I'm going back to church with them at 34 years old, still single, and this is with a lot of people that watched me grow up, and here I am, and that was tough. Like I don't know that people were judging me. They may have been. I guess that's okay. But I felt like they were. I assumed that I was being judged as being kind of a failure, and that was a tough time. I think, like in my experience as an adult, it's a choice to attend church, and at any like that's been the hardest time for me to attend. That was if there was ever a time that I would have wondered, like, hey, maybe I'm just not going to go to church. It was probably that time, because that was tough. I felt like I didn't belong. I felt like I didn't fit in, and um, I didn't know, I that yeah. I guess that was a tough time. Um, but it was also a really positive time, actually. Like it was a I learned some good lessons because I assumed that everybody just kind of fit this mold of like perfect families that I had in my mind. That you got a mom and a dad and the kids, and they're all going to church together, um, and as I took a step back and started paying attention, I realized that wasn't the case. Like there are so many different situations, and they were apparent right there in that congregation that there were other people who were single, had never been married. There were people who were divorced. There were people um, whose spouse had passed away. Um, there were all sorts of different situations, and I don't think I would have even paid attention to that had I not been in a situation myself where I felt like I didn't fit the mold. Um, Moving on from that, so I did. I
Yeah.
I got a job, And that's when I got into UX design. And I was living in Spanish Fork. I moved up to Orem with some roommates up there and started attending a mid singles ward. And this is for um, ages 31 to 45. And that was a positive thing, especially in light of my having spent a year in a family ward, um, largely because like I just wasn't meeting anybody to date. Like the only dates I was going on is if somebody in the ward said, "Hey, I want to set you up with my niece" or something like that, um, and so being able to get back into a singles situation where people were my age, that was nice. Um, but I also appreciated that this was an opportunity that I hadn't had for a little while, to meet girls and to go on dates. And as someone who is a natural introvert, it's always been a little hard for me to approach people and start conversations and things like that. But I think recognizing that this was an opportunity that I hadn't had for a while helped me get out of my shell and talk to people, particularly approaching girls and talking to girls. Um, and there was a fundamental shift that was really key for me. Um, I had always approached dating in terms of like finding a girl that I was interested in and then trying to pursue her. But if there wasn't anybody I was interested in, I was just doing nothing. And a buddy of mine in the ward, in this mid singles ward, came and he challenged me and my roommate to take a different approach and to go on a date a week. And the rules were, we agreed to this. The rules were you could it had to be a date or 3 rejections. If you got 3 rejections in one week, you were off the hook. But I agreed to this. I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And that was hard for me because I like to see the end from the beginning. I want to know, you know, at least where I'm headed. And that was a situation where I didn't have that. I didn't see that. It was just like, okay, I'll do this. I will do this thing. And I'm going to hope that somehow it leads towards marriage. Um, but I took him up on it, and I did. I went on a date every week, um, for 6 months, and that was the point at which my future wife showed up in the ward. And when she got there, I saw her that first week, and I wanted to meet her. And I went up to her and I introduced myself. And what she says, looking back on it, is that I came across as very confident. She felt like I just seemed so self-possessed and confident, and she was impressed by that. And I look back on that and realize that that would not have happened had I not done 6 months of going on a date every week. That was the preparation that I needed so that when I met my future wife, I was ready. I was ready to take action. I was prepared. Um, and I was so grateful for that because, you know, what it comes down to for me is that's a question of faith. And faith has always been a principle that I have struggled with. I feel like it's not a natural gift for me. And so I've had to work at it. But learning to just the concept of taking action, right? Like faith is a principle of action. You have to take action. And it's not just taking action. I've realized, even thinking about this recently, it's taking action despite uncertainty. It's taking action without knowing everything. And so I had to exercise faith. I had to say, yes, I will go on a date a week. I will do this, even though I can't see where this is going. I can't see exactly how this leads to the end that I want. but I'm going to do it anyway because I feel like it's the right thing to do. And like that was the fundamental shift that I needed to be able to get to the point where I was ready, where I was actually ready to meet my wife. If I hadn't done that, like my previous, what I really wanted, what I said my most of my single adult life was, I said, as I kept getting older and not getting married, was just tell me, God, please just tell me when, how old will I be when I get married? Like, is it going to be 30? That's okay. I can wait. Like, just tell me. I just want to know. I just want to know when it is.
Yeah.
And he never did that. And that was good, because if he had done that, I would have done nothing. I would just sat around and waited until I was that age. And by doing that, I wouldn't have been ready. And so what I really needed was the uncertainty. I needed to not know that. I needed to exercise faith in his promises when I couldn't see the end, and move forward with it. And that was what actually helped me to grow and prepared me, so that then I was ready. When my wife Katie showed up in that ward, I was prepared to meet her.
What a phenomenal story. I think some of the things I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into would be some of these emotions that you're feeling at the time. So when you met this 18-year-old girl that you guys hit it off with, you noticed the age difference and you thought, okay, there's nothing for me here anymore. Was there an element of like hopelessness or a sense of failure? Like I'd gotten to this age where I aged out of the young single adult ward and didn't find a match. Like maybe I'm doing something wrong, or maybe I did something bad, or maybe I'll never find my person. Did you ever have experience feelings like that along the way?
Yes, absolutely. Particularly when you talk about feelings of failure, I felt that quite acutely, um, multiple times, so often along the way, particularly when I would be really interested in a particular girl and things wouldn't work out. Um, I would get my hope up so high. I talk about how I feel like faith is not a natural gift for me, but I think hope is. Like I've always had that hope. And so, but then I would maybe unwisely just attach that hope on something that wasn't going to work out, or get my hopes up too quickly, too fast, and then things didn't work out, and that would be very discouraging for me. And yeah, I would feel like a failure. I felt like that a lot. It's interesting because when I listen to speakers at singles events, and these are often people who were married, and in the introduction they would talk about how, like, oh, and then he met and married so and so, and then it was like, whoa, 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 met and married, like what happened there? Like how did that work? Because I don't seem to be able to get that to work. And you made it sound like it just was automatic, like it was just so easy, and it's not easy for me. And so I dealt with a lot of those feelings, and a lot of feelings of rejection, and like discouragement was huge. One thing that I did not experience is feeling like maybe I'll just never get married. And that was mainly because of this blessing I got. Again, this is digging into some kind of deep stuff within the church, but it's called the patriarchal blessing. So it's a really special blessing that you can get typically as a teenager. And I got mine as a teenager, and it talks about, among other things, how I would get married. And I always felt the reassurance of that promise. I knew that that was true. I knew that that would happen. So it was never a question of if for me, it was always when. And that was a huge, huge blessing. I didn't realize it when I was younger how important that was going to be for me, because that got me through. I feel like if I didn't have that, um, wow, I would have been maybe totally despondent. I don't know, but having that promise and just having that reassurance that this was from God and this was real and this would happen, that was the thing that kept me going.
Thanks for sharing that. I think part of it for me is I had my 30th birthday last year, and I remember hitting my 30th birthday and thinking to myself, my decade of my 20s, like, I was able to do all these things, but I was hoping to have started a family and had kids by now, like I'm 30. And there was a sense of failure and loss and this feeling that maybe like life was a little bit unfair. Like I've been working really hard. I'm not super introverted. I'm pretty extroverted. Like I talk to people, and I've been able to connect really well with people. I'm like I cook, I clean, I have a master's degree. I've been working really good jobs. What was the step that was missing? And I can empathize with you that sense of like unfairness and wondering when things were gonna happen and like hoping that God was gonna get me to this point where just like like when you're 34, like when you're 35, like I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
like part of me wishes I had had that experience of knowing when it was gonna happen. But similar to you, this element of because I didn't know, I went out and had to make things happen, and I think that in itself has allowed me to get to where I am today. So I appreciate you sharing that experience. The last person I had on the podcast was Paul, and he talked about confidence. And he talked about specifically like going to do the things that he didn't feel confident in brought this level of confidence that it sounds like you going through a date in a week was not something you really wanted to do or felt confident in doing. But doing that gave you the confidence that when you met the woman that was going to be your wife, you had developed yourself, that you got to that point, and that is what made the difference for her when looking at you and pursuing that relationship. Now that's really cool to hear. Now as we transition a little bit towards the hidden skills section, I'm wondering if through this process of searching and pursuing in faith, have you found any hidden skills or passions while you were dealing with the adversity? How and when did you find them, and what drew you to them?
Yeah, yeah, and I there are two that come to mind. One I've talked about, which is faith. If we can think of faith as a skill, which I think it definitely is something you can develop, right? Um, and so
Absolutely.
that has been really fundamental for me, and just being able to say, you know what, I don't know everything, but I believe this is the right thing, and I'm going to move forward. Like I'm going to take action. I'm not going to get frozen in inaction, because that would happen to me far too easily, far too often. Is to say I'm going to take action and I'm going to go do something, even if it's something that's a little scary to me or something that I'm not sure how it's going to turn out. I'm gonna exercise that faith and go and do that. And the more that I did that, the easier it became. It still is a challenge for me. Like I would be lying if I said, "Oh, and now faith is super easy." It's still hard, but I think the skills that I developed, like it has helped me to to that it's easier, but I've also gotten better at it. Like it's I don't get tripped up necessarily on the same things anymore. Um, and I guess along those lines, the second thing I was thinking is related to that, which is just talking to people. That's it sounds pretty basic, but as a kid, you talk about, well, what were you like as a kid? I was very shy as a kid. I was just a very quiet kid. People would ask me all the time, oh, you're really shy, aren't you? That was like a super awkward question for me. Like I was like, what am I supposed to say to that? Yes, I am. Let's talk about that. Like I'm I'm already uncomfortable, and now you're making it even more uncomfortable by pointing out how uncomfortable I am. Um, but you got to give people grace. Like they didn't know that. But that's who I was, as a kid, and so just developing the ability to, and again, this is faith, is to say I'm going to try to meet someone new this week. I'm going to go to church. I'm going to try to go up to a girl and ask her if I can sit by her and get to know her a little bit. Like that was required a lot of faith, but that was something that I chose to do, like try to put myself out there. It was a little scary, and let's just do it, see how it goes. And that's been incredibly helpful for me, not just from a dating standpoint, but just in life, to be able to get to meet my neighbors, or people, people who are in the church congregation where I attend now. That has helped me a lot. And one of the things, like I mean, I do tell people, like I said today, I tend to be a shy person. I'm an introvert. And my wife always says, well, I've never really seen that side of you. She's like, yeah, because you get to go up and talk to people. And I'm like, really? Like, but that's really cool. Like, that's a skill that I think that I had to develop as part of this process that continues to serve me well.
I think what I'm trying to connect now is you mentioned going to devotionals or hearing sermons of people who where they say they met their person and then they got married. I guess for me, what I'm curious is about is you've talked about meeting your who is now your wife, and she saw this confidence in you and you jumped to being married. I guess for me, tell me the process of what it was like to go from meeting her. I mean, you explained a bit of her perspective, but I'd love to hear more of the story of how you guys ended up tying the knot.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll be honest, this is a story that I am a little embarrassed to tell because I feel like it exposes kind of my neurosis, if we can say that, and my fear of not getting things right. I was so worried about not getting things right, and not doing what God wanted, and and having this be wrong. I was so interested in this girl, and I was so worried that it would be wrong because it had never been right up to that point. Like I'd been interested in a lot of girls, and it had never been right before. And so I was just so scared of this. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of the story. But so yeah, we met that day, and I just remember I was so impressed. There was something about her that just seemed unique or different than any girl that I'd ever met, and I even had a profound kind of spiritual experience around that. And it wasn't a love at first sight. It wasn't like this is going to be your wife. It was just I was so deeply impressed with her, and I really wanted to talk to her again. And then she didn't come back to the ward for a few weeks, and when she finally did, um, I did I saw her, and then I wimped out. I wanted to go sit by her, and I didn't. But then I did talk to her after church, um and I finally reached out on Facebook, like found her on Facebook, and reached out to her, um and I really wanted to ask her out. And so um she had put her phone number there, like her friends could find her phone number on Facebook, and she'd even forgotten that she'd done that. So I called her, and when she answered the phone, I was so nervous. I was talking so fast that she was like, "Who is this?" Like, "Wait, what?" And I was like, "Oh, let me slow down. This is me." And but she said yes to go on this date with me, and um, and we went on this date. We went to Brick Oven in Provo, and then we ended up just walking around BYU campus and talking, and um, and we just talked for hours. Like we just really connected, and that was so huge for me because I'd been so impressed by her and was so interested in her from the moment that we met, that I was really trying to not get my hopes up for how this date would go, because you never know. Like it might not go great, but it did. It went incredibly well. And then we let's see. She came over to my apartment for an activity, and we ended up talking after that as well. And then I asked her out again, but at that point I was freaking out. And this is where we get into kind of my neurosis, is I was so worried that this might not be right, um, and maybe even convinced myself that it wouldn't be right. That because I think I had a deep seated belief that for some reason I wasn't going to get what I wanted. That wasn't part of God's plan for my life. And even though when I look at it, like, no, I was promised what I wanted in my patriarchal blessing. Like I had that promise, but for some reason I was convinced that I wasn't. And so I was freaking out. Um, and I ended up breaking up with her. Like, and we'd been on like 2 dates. I mean, it wasn't like we weren't dating, but but we had this deep connection. And I was just sure that it wasn't right. And so I broke up with her, and she was left like utterly confused, and ended up crying, which, like, I didn't know that until later. I thought she handled it so well. Like it was great. And I walked away saying, well, I thinking that I'd done the right thing. And she ended up going and crying, which I feel bad about in retrospect. Um, but I really could not stop thinking about her. Like for the next 2 weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about her. And during this time, I just kept praying and praying and praying, and saying, you know, I was trying to figure out, is this right? Should we get married? Like I'm trying to answer this question. I shouldn't have been trying to answer that question. It wasn't time yet, but I was just trying to force this to happen because I don't like the uncertainty. I just want to know. And um, so I was praying and praying about this, like should we get married and all this stuff. And the fundamental problem or mistake that I think that I was making is that I wanted God to make this decision for me. I, God, please make the decision for me. Tell me what to do, and I'll go do it. Um, and finally, the answer that I got was, if you choose this, then it's right. Like, but you have to choose. It's your choice. And when I realized that, it was like, oh, that that actually makes a lot of sense. I don't know why I was expecting God to decide this for me. I have to be accountable for this choice, um, because marriage is not a cakewalk. It is challenging in and of itself, and you have to be able to stand up and say, no, this was my choice. I chose this, and I'm going to be accountable for it. I'm going to move forward with it. Um, Rather than blaming it on God and saying, well, it was all your fault. You told me to marry that person. Um, and that's not how it works. And so, but once I got that answer and I kind of figured that out, like, oh, this would be right if you choose it. And then I was like, oh, well, I know what I want then. And so at that point I was really excited. Like I had been laboring over this for 2 weeks, and and I was like, oh, we need to talk. Like I need to get back together with her. And then realizing that, but I broke up with her. Like I don't know how to broach that. So finally, what I did was I wrote her a little note. It was on a thank you card because that was all I had. And I wrote her a little note that said, hey, I've been praying a lot about this, and I'm wondering if you would be willing to fast and pray with me about marriage. And went and got her a rose, and I took it and I taped the rose and the note to the door of her apartment. Um, and that literally, I mean, we talk about faith, like that required the maximum amount of faith that I could muster. Like that was it. And I'm still kind of amazed, like looking back on it, that I did that. But obviously it all worked out. So she got home, she found the note and the rose, she shared it with a roommate. They were freaking out, like, oh my gosh, And I think she texted me. So I was sitting at home on pins and needles, like, oh, what's going to happen? And she texted me and she said, Namon, thanks for the rose. And then she accidentally hit send. And I was like, oh no, like, what does this mean? She just said thank you for the rose. She didn't mention my note or like my big question or anything. Like, what's gonna and so I was trying to figure out how to respond to this. And then she finished her text after that, and she said, I'm willing to pray with you, fast and pray with you about this. But don't you think it's a little early? Like, don't you think this is a little fast? And then I started backpedal like really quick. I was like, yeah, you're right, you're totally right, whatever. And so where we landed at that point was that we would date. We were like, okay, we will date, you know, and that'll be good. And I felt really good about that. I was moving in the right direction. And um, what I hadn't anticipated was that she went ahead and fasted and prayed about marriage like I had asked her to, because she had agreed to do that. And so I went to pick her up for church that Sunday, and she came with me and sat in the car, and she was just like, yes, like I got my answer. Like the answer is yes. And I was like, oh wow. And so that's how we got engaged. And it was crazy, super fast. Like and part of why, like, I don't even like to tell like the youth in my ward. I don't like to tell them this story, because I'm like, don't follow my example. Like, don't do this. This isn't the way you should do it. but but it worked out, it worked out. And I think that the lesson for me, the takeaway is, God works with us where we are. That was where I was at. That was the best I could do with all the faith I could muster at the time. I don't think it was the best way to go about dating or getting engaged, but he works with us where we're at, and it worked out.
That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. As you look back at this entire experience from before your mission up until getting married, even to where you are today with kids, what are the biggest lessons have you learned from this experience?
Yeah, I think we've talked about it before. The biggest lesson is faith. We are not here on this planet to know everything and to act with total certainty at all times. We're here to trust God and to try to move forward with what He is asking us to do. And that is really hard for me. That can be hard for a lot of people, I guess, especially if you have kind of my mindset or tendencies. But that's my number one lesson that I learned. I think a second one is that not just that we need to have faith, but trust that God loves you, and that He has your best interests at heart. And that just because things aren't working out the way that you think they should right now, or maybe they don't seem to be going in the right direction, or whatever it is, still trust that God is good and gracious and loves you so much and has your best interests at heart, and that you can move forward with trust in Him. I mean, that's what gives you the ability to have that faith in Him, right? Even if things aren't going well right now, that He loves you. Just keep going. Things are going to work out, and they're probably going to be better than what you had planned for yourself.
As we wrap up here, I feel like you've been able to share a lot of your experience, but I would love to know what advice you'd give to someone in a similar situation.
Yeah. And I would say, I mean, first off, I feel for you. Like I feel for you because I've been there, and I know the struggles. I know how hard it can be. I know we're not the same, and not necessarily going through these same experiences, but just in general, it can be really hard. And so I've got a lot of empathy for you, but I also can offer hope that things work out. Things work out as we trust in God. They work out, and that His promises are gold. They are better than gold. That He always comes through on His promises. He always fulfills. And just exercise faith. Exercise faith, whatever that is. I'm not going to say go on a date a week. That was the thing that I had to do for me. That was the edge of my faith. But I would say find out what is the edge of your faith. Where is that line that you're just like, that is the hard thing for me right now, but I think God wants me to do it, and do that thing. Like, go do that thing, be as consistent with it as possible, because that's the space where miracles happen. That's where the growth happens. That's where the miracles happen.
Very wise advice. Thank you so much, Namon. I'm a little speechless, but we'll close on here. Namon, thank you for joining us today. It's been great to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
What a fantastic conversation with Namon Bills. His story is a great reminder that our paths don't have to be linear. Sometimes the most unexpected turns lead to the most fulfilling destinations. Namon has shown that embracing change, learning new skills, and staying open to opportunities can lead to incredible personal and professional growth. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who might need a little inspiration. You can also follow along for more stories of resilience and transformation in future episodes. Thanks again for tuning in, and until next time, remember, every trial brings its own triumph.